very good day to all of you, my dear colleagues, budding dentists and orthodontists. So today is the last session on Introduction to Orthodontic Implants. Without wasting any time, let's get started. Today will be the completing session, the closing session on Introduction to Orthodontic Implants. And what do we learn? We'll be learning about different parts of orthodontic implants, the dimensions of orthodontic implants. Well, not much on the dimensions really, because the dimensions of the implants will depend and it will vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. We just need to know about the average range of diameter and length in which the implants are available so as to choose. The third most important thing that we'll be learning today will be the primary and secondary stability of orthodontic implants or T.A.Ds. Let's get started. So when you see a cross-shaped depression on the head, it is the Phillips type. When the same head has hexagonal shape, it's called hexagonal shaped imbus. It's also been found by Esperin and many other studies even later that the greater the diameter of the implant, the greater is the strength of the implant. But that of course is a function of the core of the implant, not the head of the implant. The third function of the head of the implant is to help in application of the torque. So when you are applying or placing an implant into position, you are applying some amount of torque. Now there are two types of torques when it comes to T.A.Ds. One torque is the insertion torque, another torque is the removal torque. What do you mean by insertion torque? Insertion torque is the amount of torque or force required to place the implant into position. Removal torque is the amount of torque or force required to remove the implant from its location. Obviously, we would want to apply lesser amount of force so that we can place the implant easily without much force, much torque. If we have lesser force when we are applying the implant, there is a lesser chance of breaking the implant, first of all, lesser chance of implant fracture. Another advantage is that you are creating lesser trauma in the bone and the site of placement of the implant. By doing this, you are decreasing the number of micro fractures and hence you are increasing the primary stability of the implant. We'll be learning about that more in detail later. So when you're selecting an implant, you have to select an implant that has lower insertion torque, and when you're also the torque should be such that the removal torque should be high, in the sense that placement should be easy but removal should be slightly difficult. Now why should we choose a T.A.D with a high removal torque? So as to make sure that implant does not get dislodged easily, that is, it stays in place once it is inserted into its location. Next comes the second part of the implant, that is the transmucosal collar over here, also called as the shank or the neck of the implant. Now why is shank important? If you see structurally, it is just a part of the T.A.D that is connecting the head of the T.A.D to the core or body of the T.A.D, right? But it has more role than just this. It is more important than just being a connecting point between these two segments. The reason being, if you observe, the collar of the T.A.D is smooth, it is shiny, and that's how it's supposed to be. Why is it so? Because this is the part of the T.A.D that comes in contact with the soft tissue. In fact, this is the only part of the T.A.D that goes through and stays in the soft tissue. So this, when the soft tissue heals around the T.A.D, it heals around this portion of the T.A.D. So we have to make sure that the gingiva forms a nice compact collar around the shank or the neck of the T.A.D. By doing this, we are creating in a way a seal. The importance of this seal is that it prevents formation of oral fluids, food debris into the implant and the bone interface. So it's decreasing the chance of gingival inflammation, recurrence of gingival inflammation in the soft tissue where the implant is placed. Now why should we avoid or prevent gingival inflammation? Because if there is gingival inflammation and irritation, there is a higher chance that the implant will fail. Now coming to the third part, the body or the core of the implant. This part is very important. Now there are different types of cores, in the sense if it depends on the type or shape of the implant. If it is a tapered type, the core will be tapered. If it is a cylindrical type, it will be cylindrical. And if it's a combination type, it will have the north part or the upper part of the TAD will have a more of a cylindrical, and the lower half will have a tapered section. Nevertheless, irrespective of the type of core or body of the TAD, there are some common functions for all of the different types of TADs available. First thing is, because it forms mass-wise, it forms more than 60% of the TAD. That means you can see clearly in this picture, only 4 millimeter is formed by the head and the shank. The rest 6 millimeter is, this is just one example. The rest is formed by the core of the TAD. That means that the strength of the TAD depends on the core of the TAD. Obviously, the greater the diameter of the TAD, the greater is the strength of the TAD. Hence, you're decreasing your chance of fracture when you're placing or removing the TAD. Now, it's been proven that the cube of the diameter of the TAD is directly proportional to the strength of the TAD. That's how important the diameter of the TAD is. So obviously when you're placing and removing the TAD, yes, the strength of the TAD depends on the core. Not just that, even when it is in place, when it is being loaded for orthodontic purpose, again the diameter and the core of the TAD comes into picture. If it is a more stable, that is, it has a greater diameter, it is more stable even when it is being used. So not only during placement and removal, even when it is being used, it is in function, the TAD's diameter plays a very important role. The second part of the TAD are the threads of the TAD. So the core provides a platform to allow the TAD's threads to encircle them. So by doing this, what's happening is that it's providing a good platform for the threads, and the type of thread again will depend on what kind of implant is it. Is it a pre-tap type, wherein a pre-drilling is or a pre-tapping is required? Is it a self-tap type or is it a self-drilling type? That will decide what kind of flutes it will have, how sharp will be the flutes, what kind of pitch, or how much will be the pitch of the screw, and what is pitch of the screw. That will be learning that in the next session, in the next slides. At the tip, we have the tip of the TAD, so it's also a part of the core of the TAD, and usually around the tip part of the TAD there is also a groove, and that we have seen in the first picture in the beginning of this session. Now, what's the function of the groove? You see this groove or notch only in the self-drilling or the self-tapping type of TADs. The only function of this groove is to form a drain-like system, in the sense, whenever you cut, just imagine you are sawing through a piece of bone. Sorry, not a bone, maybe a piece or a chunk of wood. When you're sawing through a piece of wood, some amount of sawdust is created while doing so, correct? In the same way, when you're using a TAD and you are placing them or drilling them into its location, orthodontic site, that is, it has to first pierce through gingiva, soft tissue, then it has to pierce through hard tissues, that is the cortical, and then the cancellous bone. And after all the threads of the core have embedded into the bone, only then the implant or the TAD has completely seated in place. When you imagine this, you can obviously imagine the amount of osseous debris that is being created as the threads and the flutes of the TAD are piercing and cutting through the bone, both the cortical and the osseous type. Now, if all that osseous debris gets accumulated between the flutes and the threads of the TAD, obviously the TAD will not get completely seated in position. To avoid this, there are screws and notches which are present on the core, usually near the tip of the TAD, so as to slowly shift the byproduct of this cutting action of the flutes and slowly shift all that osseous debris to the middle part of the TAD, so as to make sure that the tip is cutting through and through the osseous and the cortical bone and not being stopped or interrupted from seating completely. So this is just another picture of the TAD. So in this picture, what we can see, the hexagonal head, and we already know what is better, the hexagonal or the Phillips type. And another factor in this picture that you can appreciate is the presence on the right side. You can see a hole for orthodontic wire. This is to engage um, either ligature wire or maybe helps in engaging high-type coil springs, etc. Yeah, the rest of the part more or less remains the same, and based on the tip you can appreciate that it is a self-tapping or a self-draining tap because it's quite pointed. What I'm trying to show in this picture is mainly the pitch of the screw. Now what is exactly a pitch of the screw? Pitch of the screw is simply the horizontal distance a screw travels with every turn. So what it means is that the amount of rotatory force that is being converted into a translatory force with every turn, how much depth of hard tissue and soft tissue is the screw penetrating. So it is the same on either side, whether you look at the left or you look at the right, the pitch of the screw remains the same. There are some special tags available wherein there are some special tags available in the market which have dual pitch, in the sense the pitch is different in different locations. Maybe in the beginning it is different, and towards the end of the tag near the apical region the pitch is slightly different. So by doing this you are converting the pitch from a more to a narrower distance. The advantage of a dual pitch T.A.D is that they are supposed to be having more stability than a single pitch T.A.D. The dimensions. As far as the dimensions of the T.A.D is concerned, all you need to know is the diameter and the length of the T.A.D. The yellow line, what you can see, basically represents the diameter of the T.A.D. Now there can be two types of diameter, inner diameter and outer diameter. Obviously the outer diameter is greater than the inner diameter. Inner diameter simply represents the diameter of the core of the T.A.D, whereas outer diameter counts the core of the T.A.D along with the diameter of the threads of the T.A.D. Obviously the threads are adding to the diameter of the T.A.D, and hence whenever a manufacturer says the diameter of the T.A.D is, for example, 2 mm, he's talking about the outer diameter and not the inner diameter. Now in this example, okay, I'm just giving you an example, but usually the T.A.D diameter ranges from somewhere between 1.5 to 1.5 to 1.2 millimeter. The outer diameter can be 1.6 millimeter, can sometimes be 2 millimeter, and the inner diameter can be about 1.2 millimeter. Now again, some manufacturers make it slightly more broader or thicker. Some manufacturers make it slightly leaner, varies from company to company. As far as the length of the T.A.D is concerned, it can be as short as 5 mm and it can be as long as 10 to 11 mm. Now the depth of the T.A.D will depend on the amount of tissues you are planning to permeate through. In the sense, it depends on how much tissue, soft tissue as well as hard tissue, is present in that orthodontic site. So for example, if you are placing a T.A.D in the attached gingiva near the maxillary molar, the length of the T.A.D will vary and will be very different when compared to the T.A.D that you're using between the mandibular incisors, and that will be discussing that in coming sessions. As far as the cylindrical transgingival shank is concerned, or transmucosal neck here is concerned, as it says, it is for the gum sealing. The length of this part of the T.A.D, that is the shank of the T.A.D, will vary from implant to implant. Now when you are selecting a T.A.D, always consider the length of the shank, because if you are placing a T.A.D in area where attached gingiva is thick, obviously you will have to select a T.A.D with a slightly longer shank, because we already know the shank plays a very important role in forming a good gum seal or gingival seal. In areas where the gum is in areas where the gingiva is very thin, we need to select a T.A.D with a shorter shank, and in areas where the gingiva is very thick, we need to select a slightly longer shank. Just keep that in mind when you're selecting your next T.A.D. Last but not the least, we have the primary and secondary stability T.A.D. When it comes to primary and secondary stability, please refer to William Prophet's book on contemporary orthodontics. I could not get that picture, so I have not used it over here. What I have done is I have just chosen a picture from pocketdentistry.com, and this is a picture representing the primary and secondary stability of prosthodontic dental implants. Yes, this is prosthodontic dental implant graph, not orthodontic dental implant graph. The reason I am using this is because I found that there is not much of a difference between the orthodontic dental implant graph and a prosthodontic one, but when you're quoting it somewhere, please keep that in mind and don't use this picture. I'm just using this picture to describe the bone response to implant, which applies both in the prosthodontic and the orthodontic one. But if you want exact uh, if you want to consider the technical terms and the statistics and the numbers, then you better refer to the exact picture, which is in William Prophet. Many authors have given their own graphs. You can refer to any of those specific orthodontic dental implant graphs. As far as this picture is concerned, what I'm trying to show here is the amount of primary stability and the secondary stability that takes place. Now, why is that important? Whenever you're thinking about primary stability, just keep that in mind. It refers to a stability that the implant gets from the old bone. When you say old bone, it basically means it is the bone that was present when you are placing the implant. If I'm placing a TAD today and I'm placing it between mandibular central incisors, the bone that is present today is the old bone. In the sense, few days from now, it will be called old bone. The reason being, bone continuously undergoes remodeling. So when that remodeling happens, the stability of the implant obviously decreases a little. That's not a problem really, because within a few days new bone will be formed, and that new bone will also integrate to some extent with the TAD and increase the stability of the TAD. So the new bone is responsible, that will form in future, is responsible for the secondary stability. It usually also involves some amount of osseointegration. There's a study by Robert and Deguchi, and they said that about 5 to 10% of these are two different studies really, but about 5 to 10% of offshore integration is enough to provide stability to TADs. As we can see, the initial stability is decent enough. That means that we can load TADs. So this is obviously a prosthodontic implant, so you cannot load it immediately. But in case of orthodontic implant, this amount of stability is really enough. So you can load the implant, but just make sure you don't overload it. Don't apply more than about 50 grams of force when you're using the implant, because if you do that, you'll create a lot of microfracture. Now this is the reason why, as far as microfracture is concerned, this is the reason why we need to select an implant of the self-drilling type. Studies have proven that the self-drilling type of implants, the self-drilling types of implants are more stable, they have more primary stability, hence if primary stability is better, even the secondary stability will also be greater because less amount of microfracture has taken place. Whenever you're placing an implant in position, just remember that you're creating micro trauma in the bone, which is okay because it's only a minor degree and bone heals immediately. But every micro trauma you're creating, every millimeter or micromillimeter of bone that you're chipping through and placing the implant, the bone is accelerated or stimulated to start healing. So your microfractures in the cortical bone and the cancellous bone are stimulating the bone to undergo remodeling. So you are increasing the rate at which the bone remodeling takes place. By doing this, what you're doing is you're also decreasing primary stability and you're increasing the rate at which the secondary stability or the bone remodeling starts. So maybe instead of starting after a week, the bone remodeling will start after a few days itself. Okay, this is just an exaggerated example, but I hope you get the idea. So that's why it's better you to use a self-drilling type instead of using a pre-drilling type. In a pre-drilling type, we have to first drill a bone. The moment you are drilling a bone, there itself you are creating multiple microfractures, hence decreasing the primary stability of the implant. So if you instead you skip that step and directly use a self-drilling type, you're decreasing the amount of microfracture, hence increasing the primary stability of the implant. So overall what we can see here is the bone does have that does have some amount of stability immediately after placing, and even after the primary stability decreases, some amount of secondary stability starts, although there is a mid period during which the implant is slightly weak and you have to be very careful during that period. There's a study by Creekmore and Eklund, and they say after 10 days if you place the implant it will be better. Some other authors suggest that it's better to wait for the gingiva to heal around the TAD. Once the gingival coupling is formed around the shank of the TAD and the healing has taken place, then you can load the TAD. Well, yes, you can wait, either you can load the TAD the same day, or you can wait for a few days, maybe 7 days to 10 days, and then load the TAD. But always remember, you don't have to wait for months together to load the TAD. That's it for today. I hope you learned a lot in this session, and in coming sessions we'll be learning on clinical application of the TAD, how to select the TAD based on the site of placement, different types of bone to consider when you're selecting the TAD, the armamentarium required, and some amount of evidence which is required to decide which TAD to use. If you found the session helpful, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. If there are any corrections you found with respect to this session, please drop them in the comment section below. Any suggestions you would like to say, please drop them in the comment section again. And yeah, until next time, keep learning.